Да, опять прилетел.
On the night of October 19th, 2025, Kiev's long-range drones infiltrated deep into the heart of Russia's industrial core, hundreds of kilometers beyond the border. As confirmed by the Ukrainian General Staff, the targets were the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery and a far more critical jewel, the massive Orenburg complex, Russia's and the world's largest gas processing facility. The explosions destroyed not just a facility but an idea, Russia's illusion of a secure inner region. But the true genius of this operation lay not in the burning depots, but in the panic-stricken emergency reports that poured in from Moscow and Astana the next morning. As confirmed by Reuters, immediately after the attack, Russia was forced to indefinitely halt all gas purchases from its ally Kazakhstan. This was no coincidence. This was much more than industrial chaos and a fire. It was a carefully planned geopolitical breakup, shattering Putin's energy bridge with Central Asia. Hours after the attack, Kazakhstan's energy ministry announced that it had put the country's own oil and gas production under urgent monitoring and assessed the situation as emergency. The Ukrainian General Staff also confirmed a crucial piece of information. On the night of October 19th, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, in coordination with the Russian resistance group Black Spark, struck the Orenburg gas processing plant, located 1,500 kilometers from Ukraine. This was a major embarrassment for the Putin regime. To fully grasp how this operation led to such a devastating outcome, we must examine the target itself, the Orenburg gas processing plant, layer by layer. First, let's look at the geoeconomic dimension, because the true genius of this operation lies not in the technology used, but in the geoeconomic importance of the chosen target. The Orenburg facility you see on the screen is not an ordinary refinery or gas storage facility. It is one of the main switches in Russia's energy grid, literally an Eurasian energy hub. This is the Orenburg gas processing plant, operated by Gazprom Pererobotka, a subsidiary of Gazprom. It is not just a place where gas is stored, but the world's largest gas chemical complex. In other words, it is an irreplaceable, multi-billion-dollar marvel of complex engineering that processes, separates, and converts gas into chemicals. In a calm statement after the attack, the Ukrainian General Staff specifically stated that the target was one of the gas purification units. This proves that the target was not chosen at random. This unit is the brain of the entire facility. Without it, the raw gas coming from the pipelines is nothing more than useless pollution. Hitting that unit is like hitting the brain. The rest of the facility instantly becomes a useless pile of metal. This facility had two vital and interlocking roles. First, it was critical for Russia's domestic market. Processing its own production in Russia's vast Volga-Ural region, Orenburg was one of the main facilities feeding Russia's densely populated European part, primarily Moscow. A blow to this facility was a direct blow to Russia's home front. It was cutting off the artery that warms Russian homes and powers factories as winter approaches. This alone would have been a strategic success. But that was not Kiev's target. The real target was the facility's second and far more critical role, the Geoeconomic bridge. The Orenburg facility was the sole center processing all natural gas from Kazakhstan's massive Karachaganak field, Russia's most important Central Asian ally. This was not a choice, but an unalterable infrastructure necessity dating back to the Soviet era. The equation that had been in place for years, economically locking the two countries together, was simple. Kazakhstan pumps the raw gas extracted from its fields across the border via pipelines to Orenburg. This giant facility, operated by Russian energy giant Gazprom, processed, purified, and separated the gas. This processed gas was then sold to the Russian grid, and part of it was exported to the world via Russia. This was an economic umbilical cord linking the two countries, worth billions of dollars annually. On the night of October 19th, Ukraine severed this very lifeline. When the facility was hit, engulfed in flames, and its critical processing units were disabled, the capacity to process raw gas from Kazakhstan vanished instantly. This triggered a chain reaction. Russia now had no choice. They had to cut off this lifeline from their ally with their own hands, completely halting the flow of gas from Kazakhstan. This is self-strangulation triggered by an enemy attack. Russia was forced to turn off its allies' tap itself. This is a textbook example of how a military attack can turn into a flawless logistical strangulation. Now let's look at the tactical dimension. Ukrainian sources reported that the operation was carried out by long-range UAVs, likely equipped with AI-assisted autonomous navigation systems. This demonstrates once again how Russia's electronic warfare systems and layered air defense network were breached. The most shocking reality here was the distance. Ukrainian sources confirmed that the attack was carried out from 1,250 to 1,500 kilometers away from the front line. We need to digest this distance. This is far beyond Moscow, in the industrial heartland at the foot of the Urals, which Russia considers safe. This proves that Russia's much-vaunted layered air defense network, S-400, S-300, Pantsir, is completely blind, deaf and dysfunctional, not only at the front, but even in the deepest strategic points of the country. These UAVs, likely using AI-powered autonomous navigation systems, managed to infiltrate at low altitude by exploiting blind spots in Russian radar coverage or by following riverbeds. This is a declaration of the total paralysis of Russian air defense. As confirmed by the Ukrainian General Staff, the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, in coordination with the Russian resistance group Black Spark, carried out an operation against the Orenburg gas processing plant, 1,500 kilometers away from Ukraine, documenting the internal collapse of the Putin regime. This is no longer the isolated actions of local partisan groups like Black Spark. This is a state-sponsored, systematic campaign of destruction. In the same wave of attacks, the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery was also hit, and this attack was claimed by the 14th Separate UAV Regiment, an official unit of the Ukrainian armed forces. This means that Ukraine's newly formed UAV forces are conducting a coordinated, long-range, and surgically precise operation to shut down Russia's economic engine. The domino effect triggered by the explosions in Orenburg and the fires at the Novokuybishevsk refinery began immediately and ignited a multi-dimensional crisis. The immediate consequences of this attack are catastrophic for both Russia's home front and its ally, Kazakhstan. First, let's look at the consequences for Russia. Collapse of the home front. As mentioned earlier, the Orenburg facility processed not only imported gas, but also Russia's own production from its vast Volga-Ural region. This production was one of the main arteries feeding Russia's most densely populated European part, including Moscow. Now this artery has been cut off. The plant's shutdown came at a terrible time for Russia, already crushed by sanctions and struggling to survive on a war economy. On the cusp of winter, this attack is a domestic disaster that will trigger a regional energy crisis, a slowdown in industrial production, fuel shortages, and an inflation spiral. This means less fuel, idle production lines, and homes that cannot be heated. This attack was like stabbing a bleeding wound with a dagger. According to a report published by RBC Ukraine on October 12th, just 1 week before this attack, more than half of the Russian Federation, at least 57 regions, was already grappling with a severe fuel crisis. According to analyses verified by BBC Verify, since January 2025, 21 of Russia's 38 major refineries, meaning more than half, had been hit and damaged by Ukrainian drones. The country was literally running out of fuel to power its war machine and feed its civilian population. And now, not only the refineries, but also the world's largest gas chemical complex, the heart of the system, has been taken offline. This has turned the existing shortage into a total paralysis. According to a report published by the Moscow Times just 4 days before the attack, on October 15, 2025, and based on Forbes Russia's rankings, Gazprom was Russia's most indebted company, with a net debt of 6 trillion rubles, approximately $60 billion. The company was already mired in debt after losing the European market. Now, on top of this massive debt, the cost of rebuilding the world's largest facility has been added. This is not damage that can be repaired. This is signing the obituary of a bankrupt giant. Gazprom has neither the capital nor the time to repair this facility. We remember the massive gas station queues created by the refinery attacks that began in the spring of 2024 and peaked in the fall of 2025. reminiscent of the Soviet collapse in the early 1990s. At that time, Russia tried to temporarily control the situation by banning exports and begging for gasoline from Kazakhstan. But now, both refineries, Novokuybishevsk, and gas processing giants Orenburg are being hit simultaneously and in a coordinated manner. This is not a hole that the Kremlin can patch up. This is the severing of one of the system's main arteries. This is not just a fuel crisis, but also a governance crisis. Putin's years-long propaganda narrative to the public that the war is only being fought within Ukraine's borders, Moscow and St. Petersburg are safe, has now been reduced to ashes, even in Russia's deepest industrial regions. However, the immediate effects of this attack were an even greater source of embarrassment for Putin, because he had been humiliated and embarrassed in front of his ally, Kazakhstan. Just hours after the attack, international financial agencies announced that Kazakhstan's energy ministry had placed the country's own oil and gas production under urgent monitoring and assessed the situation as urgent. Why the panic? Because the Orenburg facility, where Kazakh gas was processed and sold to Russia, was now gone. The facility had lost its function. This is also a disaster scenario for the Kazakh economy. The main facility where they would process their gas and sell it to Russia is now in ruins. This means they will have to halt production in a chain reaction or drastically reduce their capacity. This represents a direct loss of billions of dollars in revenue for the Kazakh treasury. The government in Astana is watching the crisis unfold, unsure of what to do. Putin's dilemma is precisely this. For years, he has played the role of regional protector for Kazakhstan. He gave it security guarantees and offered economic partnerships. But now, because of the war Putin started, that ally's economy has been directly hit. Worse still, Russia has had to shut off the valve itself because it cannot process that ally's gas. The Kazakh government, Tokayev, now faces a catastrophe. Due to its strategic energy ties with Russia, it risks losing billions of dollars. This is not the stability Putin promised them. This is the war being imported into their own homes. This is total economic chaos. Kiev's move is ruthlessly clear. With this attack, Ukraine has sent a clear message to the Kazakh government and other neutral actors in the region. This is the price of doing business with Russia, of indirectly giving Putin's war machine a lifeline. Putin's war now affects not only Ukraine, but also Putin's allies, both indirectly and directly. Russia is not a reliable partner. It is a poisonous thorn that drags you into its own disaster. This is a perfect diplomatic trap. This is dynamite planted at the very foundation of Putin's entire Eurasian strategy, which he has been trying to build for 20 years. Let us remember that Putin marketed the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO, and the Eurasian Economic Union as a counterweight to the West. Kazakhstan, with its economic and geographical size, has always been the keystone of these structures. Now, Kiev's move is hollowing out this alliance, rendering it meaningless. Elites in Kazakhstan are now asking, what is the point of this alliance when our supposed ally, who is supposed to protect us, cannot even manage its own war and is destroying our economy because of it? The attack on the Orenburg facility is not just a simple explosion. It is actually a move that shatters Putin's regional hegemony from within. On the other hand, this fire in Orenburg is not an isolated incident or a chance success. It is the latest and most sophisticated culmination of a systematic strangulation strategy that Ukraine has been weaving for months, even years. This is the final act in a long-running war targeting the Russian energy sector. Let's recall the timeline of this collapse. It all began in the spring of 2024. At that time, Ukraine launched an unprecedented drone attack campaign, targeting Russia's oil refineries one by one. Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles attacked Russia's largest refineries deep inside its territory. Reuters documented in its March 12, 2024 analysis that these attacks destroyed at least 12% of Russia's total oil processing capacity. This was a humiliation for a global energy giant on its own turf. Putin's energy superpower propaganda could no longer provide gasoline to his own people. The Kremlin was forced to take desperate measures, such as banning gasoline exports, to prevent growing panic in the domestic market and secure the flow of fuel to the military. This was a blow worth billions of dollars to the Russian economy. But the crisis did not end there. The attacks were so effective that they plunged Russia into an unimaginable integrated. The crisis deepened to such an extent that another embarrassment, documented again by Reuters on April 8, 2024, occurred. The Russian Federation, one of the world's largest energy producers, practically begged its ally Kazakhstan to create an emergency gasoline reserve. Moscow requested 100,000 tons of gasoline from Astana. This was begging diplomacy. Putin was begging Kazakhstan for gasoline because of Ukrainian drones. This was a moment that painfully exposed Russia's economic fragility and dependence on its allies. Now, let's go back in time to today, October 19, 2025. Ukraine had learned its lesson. It had developed its strategy. The autumn of 2025 was disastrous for Russia. Nearly 40 Russian refineries were targeted, many of which lost their functionality. And today, Russia had lost more than 40% of its oil production capacity. All refinery complexes, from St. Petersburg to Crimea, from Volgograd to Smolensk, had been targeted at least once. In 2024, Russia tried to heal its wounds by begging for gasoline from Kazakhstan. At this point, we see how a tactical attack turned into a strategic chess move. This blow to Orenburg is Ukraine's most sophisticated diplomatic checkmate move to date. This attack directly pitted Putin against Kazakhstan, Russia's most important, largest, and most strategic ally in Central Asia. Now, let's step away from the chessboard and look at the entire map, the bigger picture. The geopolitical consequences of this attack are devastating for Russia. First, Russia's isolation. Recall the equation at the start of the war. Putin began the war by threatening the West, especially Germany, with energy, the Nord Stream pipeline, holding them hostage. He aimed to divide the West and paralyze NATO. At the point we have reached today, this equation has completely reversed. Ukraine is isolating Putin in his own backyard, Eurasia, by blowing up his energy bridges with his own allies, Kazakhstan. It is no longer the West that is subject to energy blackmail, but Russia's own allies. It is now Kiev that is waging asymmetric warfare and bringing economic attrition to the enemy's territory. It is not just steel and concrete that lie beneath the rubble of this attack. What lies beneath this rubble is Putin's 20-year-old energy superpower doctrine. This was the very essence of Russia's modern identity. According to a report published by the New Voice of Ukraine on October 14th, just 5 days before the attack, a shocking report prepared by Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, SZRU, revealed the bitter truth. Due to ongoing refinery attacks, Russia may be forced to import 60% of its fuel needs by the end of 2025. Think about that. The country that peddled the lie that it was one of the world's largest energy exporters now faces the prospect of becoming a fuel importer just to keep its tanks and cars running. This is not the death of a superpower doctrine. It is the admission that the doctrine was a lie. Russia is now a bankrupt state that can no longer feed itself or its allies. The second geopolitical consequence is the new front of war. This attack confirms that the nature of war has changed. The war is no longer confined to the trenches or frontline villages in Ukraine. The war has moved to Russia's industrial heartland, its economic allies, and the most sensitive foundations of its diplomatic relations. T-Advisor's analysis of Gazprom's financial statements is the final and clearest proof of this collapse. Struggling with a massive debt of 6 trillion rubles, Gazprom was forced to reduce its investment program for 2025 to 1.5 trillion rubles. This technical figure means that the billions of dollars needed to rebuild the world's largest gas facility are no longer available. Consequently, the massive fireball that rose into the sky in Orenburg on the night of October 19th was not just the burning of a gas facility. It was the ashes of Putin's energy superpower propaganda and his Eurasian Union dream. By combining low-cost drones with strategic thinking, Ukraine has not only destroyed a multi-billion-dollar industrial giant for Russia, but also made a deadly diplomatic move that has separated it from its most important regional ally. This is a perfect combination of technological asymmetry and geopolitical chess. Kiev is striking Russia not only with its own weapons, but also with its own dependencies and its own allies. Russia is now suffocating in the flames of the war it started, in its own backyard, with its own lifelines severed. Thank you for choosing us.